The Nintendo DS holds a special place in my heart. In fact, I still have my original Sapphire Blue DS Fat from 2004, and somehow mine still has functioning hinges. When Reggie announced it at E3 in 2004, the hype was absolutely insane as a kid.
This is Nintendo DS.
I vividly remember trying to get information with my friends on forums like GameFAQs about what the new Pokemon games would be called, and they're some of the best memories that I have from the mid-2000s. I think it even revitalized people's interest in Nintendo after the somewhat lackluster launch of the GameCube, and I think a lot of people view the 2000s era for Nintendo to be one of the best decades for gaming as young adults. But to me, the DS is one of the more interesting consoles because of the obscure stuff that rolled out alongside it that was mostly forgotten about.
I like it!
You've got stuff like Metroid Prime Pinball and the Opera web browser available as a standalone cartridge, but even more niche than that are the music-making games by Korg for the DS that were way ahead of their time. One of my friends linked me a Twitter post about this a while back, and I'm glad he did because after reading about them, this video became one of my favorites to write about. The first one of these games to get released was the Korg DS-10, which is a digital sister to the Korg MS family of synthesizers. The fact that this exists at all is absolutely wild to me considering it was made in 2008. Smartphones were still pretty new at the time, and music production tools that fit in your pocket were basically non-existent. It's not exactly hard to find on eBay, but even though it's not too rare or expensive, it feels like such a relic of a time gone by where companies were being more experimental with games and products for consoles. I'd even go as far as to say it's not really a game at all, even though it's sold as a cartridge. Instead, it's a full-blown digital synthesizer that, in my opinion, has no right to be as awesome as it is. One of the coolest things that the DS-10 has is the emulation of the Chaos Pad by Korg, which lets you use the stylus from the DS as an instrument or a controller for different parameters. It sort of reminds me of a super early version of that hand gesture-based instrument on Shark Tank, and even though the Chaos Pad seems like a gimmick, it's definitely not and lends itself really well to the DS touchscreen. There's also a basic mixer and an effect rack with a chorus, flanger, and delay, and a digital version of the patcher for parameters like the original MS-10 synthesizer had. I don't know if it's just because it was made to run on the DS or because the original MS-10 just had this type of sound, but the DS-10 manages to perfectly capture the soundscape of 2000s video games. One of the other more experimental features that the DS-10 had was the ability to connect up to 8 different DS devices together so that 8 different people could be working on the same project at the same time. While I was reading about the DS-10, I came across a creator named AudioPilz who did a review of this synthesizer, and this guy is an absolute madman. He got the DS-10 to sync with other analog devices to control parameters in the DS-10, and while I'm not exactly sure that if it was meant to do this, he does lay out how it's possible in his video.
But syncing with other musical instruments is not always easy. It is possible though. I'm not much of a modular guy, but I'm more than happy to dust off the old Nord for this little sync tutorial.
Unfortunately, it does have some downfalls, like how you can't play chords with the synthesizers because they're monophonic, meaning that they can only generate one tone at a time. You're also limited to a 16-step patterns, which isn't exactly ideal, but you can string them together for a longer song. But even with its limitations, I feel like it's got charm, and I commend Korg for making such a faithful representation of the original hardware synths, and other people seem to think so too, because I found so many comments from people telling their own stories about how they got into music production and synthesis because of the DS-10. It's insane to think that this weird little product that Korg made in the 2000s had such a profound impact on people, even though it was only a tiny blip on the Nintendo DS timeline. However, our story doesn't end here because Korg actually made a few follow-up games to the DS-10 that expanded the capabilities of the original. The DS-10 Plus came out in 2010, and this cartridge seems to be a lot more rare than the original, because even used copies without the case or instructions go for over $50 or more on eBay, and it seems like a lot fewer were manufactured than the original DS-10. At first glance, they look pretty similar, but there are a few notable differences. You get 4 synth tracks instead of 2, and 2 drum tracks instead of Mode 1 like in the original, which lets you build a bit more full-sounding songs. However, this is only possible if you're using a DSI because it has faster parts inside. The other main limitation that was lifted with the new version was the ability to edit synth patches and mute individual tracks while playing live, which is something that was sorely needed. That's pretty much it with the major upgrades for the Plus version, and I think there was a missed opportunity to add MIDI input as an upgrade, but Korg outdid themselves a few years later and released two different synthesizers for the 3DS in 2013 and 2014. The MO1D came out first in 2013, and it was a Nintendo eShop exclusive, which is unfortunate because having a box version just feels so much better. Anyways, the MO1D was a digital emulation of the M1 keyboard from 1998, and it contained 342 different sounds, and it's able to play 24 different voices at once, which is a huge upgrade from the DS10. I think the most important thing they did right here was that you could save MIDI onto an SD card to use elsewhere, which wasn't possible before. And I think that this one feature by itself takes it from a self-contained instrument on the DS and turns it into a legitimate tool that you can use for music production. Not only that, but you could share your data through Wi-Fi with other 3DSs so that anyone could download your project and play it themselves, and it lifted the 16-step limit for patterns and upgraded it to 64. None of this would even matter if it didn't sound good though, but holy f, this thing is a crazy step up from the DS10. Just listen to some of the sounds it can make. It perfectly captures the original 80s feel and even sounds like something you'd hear in a flagship Nintendo game. The MO1D is entirely separate from the original DS10 though, and is emulating a completely different synthesizer. However, in 2014 they would release the DSN-12 for the 3DS, which is a true successor to the DS10. Sadly, it's an eShop exclusive, which was shut down in March of 2023, so you can't even buy it anymore. However, the synth itself is an insane upgrade to the original. Instead of 2 synthesizers, you get 12, and instead of 16 patterns, you get 64, and the patterns are all 64 steps long, which gives you a lot more length to any songs that you make. It also does sound much cleaner than the DS10, which might be a positive or a negative depending on how you look at it. Now, there was a moment when I was researching for this video where I realized how absolutely crazy the DSN-12 was, and it was when I heard this guy demo a song on it. The guy on stage is named PAINTVOX, and he was the winner of a commercial contest that Korg ran for the best song made with the DSN-12. The fact that this song came out of a 3DS is absolutely bonkers to me. It actually sounds like a completely fleshed out song that could have come from a professional DAW like Ableton or FL Studio. And I think that's why it's so sad that so few people actually got to experience it. There's just some type of magic about what they managed to accomplish with a Nintendo DS, and I'm not really sure something like this would be made today because it's such an experimental risk. All of this is to say that Korg managed to do something truly special with these synthesizers. It lets people who might not otherwise be interested in music production to experience it on a device that they're familiar with. Not to mention that they sound damn good even with the limitations that they have. Thank you guys for watching, stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next video.